Hi, my name is Timothy Fuller. I'm an aspiring philosopher. I have a bachelor's from Rutgers University in philosophy and economics. I've applied for graduate school for fall 2026, and I wrote this paper with the hope to publish it. Right now, it is in a near final form, but I have sent it over to some animal ethics experts because I want to have their inputs and opinions on it before I send it in for publication. The title of the paper is Ethical Bivalve, Sentience, Boundary Cases, and Moral Refinement. My website is www.timothyfullerphilosophy.com. Other papers are, you'll see me write on institutional ethics, and it's one of my first forays into animal ethics. I got the idea when thinking about why vegetarians don't eat clams and oysters, assuming that they don't do so because they don't want to cause animals suffering, not some broader aversion to animal protein as a rule. Okay, the current moral ethos around animals as food. Things that are important in this consideration is suffering, sentience. Does it have a face? We ought to have some moral trepidations as a baseline. The slide is trying to capture the dominant moralist view in animal ethics, not necessarily popular culture, but the philosophical position overall. When philosophers argue that eating animals is wrong, the core reason is almost always suffering or experience. The idea is that there's something that's like to be an animal and that we are harming that experience. And I want to be clear, I think this basic orientation is right. But once you accept it, a further question becomes unavoidable. Experience, ability to suffer, goals or wants, a nervous system that processes pain in a meaningful way. Those are some of the thresholds when it comes to moral consideration towards certain animals. What pushed me towards this paper, especially while rereading Nagel, What It's Like to Be a Bat, is the idea that ethics starts from experience. Nagel's point isn't that bats per se are morally sacred, it's that there is something it is like to be a bat. That's a fact. And that idea struck with me. For some animals, dogs, cows, octopuses, it feels undeniable that there's some rich inner experience happening. When it comes down to like ants, I'm a little bit more uncertain. And for bivalves, oysters, and clams, I'm really confident there's basically nothing it's like to be them. Not to discount them as totally unimportant or anything, but just there's no objective way we can say there's experience there. Now, the issue animal as a category misfires. The category is way too broad. The following are all animals: humans, elephants, whales, dogs, ants, oysters, clams. They raise very different ethical considerations when we talk about food from each animal to animal, but they are all in the broad category of animal. So I argue that animals doing way too much work here. Humans and oysters are both animals, and so are whales and ants. But if I told you we're going to eat an animal tonight, your moral reaction would depend entirely on which animal and why. And that tells us something important. The category itself is not morally decisive. It does not tell us enough to inform. Bivalve biology. So you look at a bivalve, no centralized brain, no nociceptors that are analogous or similar to vertebrates at all. Very simple nerve nets, largely reflexive behavior. So it responds automatically to certain tactile feelings. There's no evidence of learning or any type of goals. No behavioral pain responses. This is where people often start to feel uncomfortable because if what grounds moral concern is experience, then bivalves looks empty if you look at it. They respond to stimuli, yeah, but so do plants. They open and close, they filter water. It's all reflexive. But there's no evidence of any pain processing, no learning, no goals, no viewpoint, nothing to say that there's something that's like to be one. Now, bivalves in the paradigm of animal protein reality. Demand persists for animal protein. We can take that as a given. livestock equals high suffering. Bivalves approximately equal negligible suffering or approaching zero. And replacement lowers harm. So, it felt strange to me that our response to livestock suffering has largely been, beyond meat, lab grown meat, hyper processed foods and substitutes that are super bad for you. Before asking a simpler question, is there already an animal protein source that involves dramatically less suffering before you go to like Beyond Meats? And if you just look at it, replacing a beef meal with a scallop meal isn't morally neutral. It's doing some work there. There's some real harm reduction happening. So it's not about, perfection. It's more about refinement, and it's about net suffering in the world. Now here I introduce a thought experiment. Some cultures eat animals others consider pets. For instance, cows are sacred in India. So imagine animal protein demand must be met, but you can trade a certain amount of oysters to save one dog or cow or cat. It could maybe be a pet or like a favored animal on a farm. Now, what response is reasonable? Now, if you hesitate at all, that tells you something. Most people would trade thousands, millions perhaps of oysters to save their beloved dog. And that reveals what we already believe. Moral weight tracks experience, not category. It's more about the experience. If there's something just like to be an animal, that particular animal, and what the quality of that experience is. Animals as a category isn't helpful. Ethical frameworks need adjustment. Substitution can reduce suffering. What matters is experience overall. That's what we hope to track. Bivalves are ethically unlike livestock. It's one of the main core claims of the paper. They show us that where animal ethics is still relying on categories instead of evaluation. There are policy implications here, obviously, potential subsidies, education. You could do some innovation, encouraging more farming. But philosophy has to do one thing well at a time. So this paper is just more concerned with the scope of fixing the categories before prescriptions, but that's certainly something that I look forward to as a future project. Now, there's some objections. So there's like the uncertainty objection. What if bivalves actually do suffer? Well, if you look at the objective evidence and the biology, expected suffering is extremely low or approaches zero. There's no central brain or processing. And just because we don't know something for certain doesn't mean we can't work with some very reliable evidence that we see empirically. Slippery slope. Exceptions might weaken animal ethics. Distinctions already exist everywhere in ethics. There's the same argument when it comes to like a hospital and they have to make certain decisions and people pause those decisions because how are you to say, that, someone deserves to die or anything like that? But we make these decisions all the time when it comes to triage and economic decisions. Every 1% of unemployment causes deaths, and not addressing them also has harms that will occur. And there's also the cultural or elitist. Bivalves are luxury foods. Now, moral status isn't the same as market conditions. These objections matter, but none of them erase the massive expected difference in suffering. Avoiding these distinctions doesn't make ethics safer, it makes it less effective. In conclusion, suffering is what really matters. In experience, the categories can mislead. Bivalves are ethically distinct from livestock animals, and replacement reduces harms. It's the main argument. Not that everyone should eat bivalves necessarily, but that animal ethics need to track what it claims to care about consistently, which is experience, suffering, and where harm actually occurs. And we'll also have references. These are some of the philosophers I've read to inform the paper and this presentation. And I'll leave off with a quote from Peter Singer, who is a great animal activist and has written very richly on the subject. Uh, all arguments to prove man's superiority cannot shatter this hard fact. In suffering, the animals are our equals. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day. And please comment your thoughts.